Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek, insight from the reporters and editors that bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomberg Businessweek Weekend Podcast. Another busy week with investors contemplating the impact of U.S. tariffs against its biggest trading partners and of the role of Elon in the U.S. government. It was a week, too, with a lot of earnings as Alphabet, Amazon, AMD, ARM, Qualcomm, Ford, and Uber were among those that reported. It kept us pretty busy.
We also got another big read Friday on the U.S. jobs market. All of the details can be found on the Bloomberg terminal and at Bloomberg.com. You add it up, and you've got a lot coming at financial markets and at leaders. So this hour, we're going to get an update on trust of government, business, media, and more with the CEO of the global PR and communications company, Edelman.
Plus, we mentioned Elon, a look at how his government takeover has been as swift as it has been chaotic, and understanding the possible land and resource grabs of President Trump's geopolitical plays.
All of that to come. We begin, though, with the importance of trust, as political polarization and growing class divisions have led to a widespread loss of trust in large institutions. According to the Edelman Trust Barometer, now in its 25th year, 61% of respondents now hold grievances against government, business, and the rich.
To help us understand the report's findings, we spoke with Edelman CEO Richard Edelman, who had just returned from the World Economic Forum in Davos, and there he got the pulse of global business leaders.
So I think the American CEOs were quite bullish. They felt, deregulation, lower taxes, a chance to, increase investment. Meanwhile, the European CEOs felt deeply depressed, and they were nervous about trade. They were nervous about regulation. I heard one CEO tell me he has 35,000 data points to give to the EU on environmental regulation every year. And that's a huge burden. So, also, I would say it was a very business-like Davos. Other than Trump's last day appearance and Milei of Argentina, there were very few government leaders. So it was a much more business-like Davos.
It's interesting that you say that. You're probably the second person to tell us that the mood of European CEOs was pretty gloomy.
Well, they're gloomy because I think they feel trapped between the U.S. and China. They have big sales in China, cars, et cetera.
Right.
Their energy costs are high. Their regulation is high. And frankly, they're nervous about the German economy, the French economy, both of them wobbling along. So they don't have domestic demand like the U.S. does.
So it's interesting as, we navigate from day to day, hour to hour, the headlines that come out of the White House and the Oval Office. And so I am curious, was there a perspective among the global CEOs, or more importantly, the American CEOs, that it's kind of a wait and see, that we think some of it is a lot of talk, and that ultimately, as you said, policies will make business sense and they might not be as extreme as some of the conversations around them are?
I think.
Or you can tell me I'm wrong.
No. Look, I think our trust barometer came out in time for Davos, and the thing that was so noteworthy, Carol, is that we see the world slipping into grievance. And that 60% of the world's moderate or high grievance. And especially in Germany, 35% of people highly aggrieved just before their elections.
Yeah.
And why is that? Well, it's inflation. It's the sense that, my family won't be better off in the next generation, lack of hope, fear of job loss to AI. And so I think business has every way to solve this. Give me a good job, reskill me, have affordable products. That's the playbook. And CEOs need to make sure that it's about their business.
Why do you think we see this happening around the world? It's not this idea of grievance is not particular to one single country or one single region. Well, is this a post-COVID phenomenon? Is it a rise of the cost of living phenomenon? Is it a globalization phenomenon? Is it all of the above? What is it?
It's like dominoes. And so, you start with the mass class divide, and you have a battle for truth, and you have this problem of COVID 5 years on, where people, mental health and other things, and then you have all the geopolitical issues. And so all of this is a lot, and people feel continuously punched. And so I think they used to take it and just have fears. And then Now they're aggrieved and they're prepared to fight back. And whether it's misinformation or even violence, this is what we start to see. And business has every reason to be concerned about this because business is distrusted by the highly aggrieved. It's different than most because business is the most competent, most ethical, except for the highly aggrieved. So business has to try to pull people back from this cliff and make people feel as if they have good jobs, they can get well paid, they will be reskilled and can compete.
So what's the problem? Is it that workers aren't sharing in the profits? I mean, we're in earnings season. We see it. I mean, companies are doing well. And is it a case that they're not sharing all of those with their workers?
Well, here's an example. In Japan, there hasn't been really a raise for workers for 30 years.
Okay.
And so you get the idea of why people in the lowest quartile of income feel deeply aggravated relative to the higher income.
So why aren't CEOs appreciating those workers at that level?
I think that they are, in the sense that they use them, they put them in jobs. But the truth is, there's been outsourcing, there's been globalization, there's now AI. All of this is towards cost and effectiveness. And so CEOs are balancing a lot of these factors, but they do want employees to work hard and be satisfied. And the key to that is pay.
We saw CEOs stand behind the president at the inauguration.
Some,
exactly. Not all. We saw many prominent ones there. In general, we have seen some CEOs share their views politically more so in recent weeks and recent months than we're sort of accustomed to. You said there's this idea that they're cheering deregulation, they're cheering lower taxes. But what about the chaos that's associated with the administration thus far? Is it a distraction to them? Is it what you get with Donald Trump because we knew that in the first term? Or is it something that concerns them because they need to make decisions about their businesses in China, in Canada, in Mexico?
I think CEOs need to argue for agenda items that suit their business. So, for example, if trade is a key part of your business, you should go out and advocate for free trade and say, this is going to cause inflation, or it's going to make my supply chain inefficient, or it's actually going to cost jobs in America. But also, the non-American companies need to make the case for investing in the U.S., putting more manufacturing here, making sure that it's aligned to the president's agenda. It's both. But I don't believe that CEOs should stick their heads up and be very political. I think they should do their businesses.
But, I want to go back to what you said. 61% globally have a moderate or high sense of grievance, which is defined by a belief that government and business make their lives harder and serve narrow interests, and wealthy people benefit unfairly from the system. I'm waiting for the deluge of emails of we got that, Carol. That explains politics that are going on. But Richard, is it just a case of paying workers more? I'm not saying just. I don't mean that. But I mean, is that the fix? Because there are a lot of disillusioned individuals here in the United States and around the globe who just feel completely left behind.
So inflation is corrosive. Got to get inflation under control so that people feel as if when they run hard, they're not running into the wind. Second, they got to feel as if they have a chance for the future. Reskilling, upskilling, core. And then third is pay and continuous ability to get to a better place.
That seems like such an easy fix. Mm-hmm. Why then aren't we getting there? Paying workers more. We've had guests on, right, talking about a living wage and then some. Why isn't it being done?
Because we're not taking full advantage of what's possible. AI is actually an enhancement tool for workers to be able to produce more. I mean, in my business, I can see how much faster people turn out press releases and message points and things like this. Everyone's got to put AI into their workflows. Also, we've got to be sure this reskilling thing so that everyone feels as if he or she can compete, not just the 22-year-old who's just out of school.
Because I feel like we've talked reskilling for years.
Yeah, it's true, but we've never done it. We've never done it in an effective way. And also, business can't do this alone. Business should do this with government and NGOs. And the secret here is NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they're local. They're also actually believable for the high grievance people. Business is not. So business should partner with community organizations.
We were supposed to see reskilling after NAFTA. And obviously that didn't happen to the extent that many people thought it would or were told that it would. How do these workers use AI if they're not in part of the knowledge economy or if they're not writing press releases, if they're not writing message points, like what is the way that for people to embrace AI rather than be scared of it?
So one of our clients, Honeywell, is using AI on the factory floor and making their workers more productive. That's the key to the future. And actually, blue-collar workers have much less job risk than white-collar in insurance and other things where they're repetitive skills. So blue-collar workers could thrive. This is a very important message that most people haven't absorbed. And we need to keep telling this. And we also need optimism back in this country. We need to make sure that people believe again that the country can do better. Because in the moment, there's this inundation of negativity. And I think competence and ethics will get you so far. But if you want to run an 8-minute mile, it's aspirational for me these days. But I have to believe that I can.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that we also, at the same time, have been talking about American exceptionalism, like in comparison to what's going on in Europe and so on and so forth. But there's so many people in our society that don't feel that. You know, when we talk about stock market, well, not everybody's in the market.
Only half the people are in the market.
Correct. And I look in my world, people I talk to, a younger generation, are like, I'm not going to have kids. How am I going to afford kids? I can't even buy a house. Like, it's just crazy.
But again, the chance to get to optimism is based on specific actions. And if there's a national reskilling campaign, or even by cities, I think this is interesting, Carol. The trust has gone local. Trust in my mayor, my country, my company, my CEO is much higher than anybody else. So this is a channel that companies should use.
There you have it. Edelman CEO, Richard Edelman.
Coming up on Bloomberg Businessweek, Elon Musk's Doge disruption and his impact in just a few short weeks.
That's next. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Now to two well-known tech companies, both with government contracts and huge tech billionaires connected to each. We are talking about Palantir and SpaceX.
Palantir shares soaring to a record following earnings this past week after the company gave a full-year revenue forecast that exceeded analysts' estimates, driven by, quote, untamed organic growth and demand for its AI software.
And then there's SpaceX and its founder, Elon Musk, and his Doge team's seemingly taking over of the U.S. government. It's a move that sparked concern among various unions, now urging the courts to block Doge from getting Treasury and labor data.
We knew we needed a roundtable on this, and so we caught up with Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin and Bloomberg News technology reporter Kurt Wagner. Max kicking it off with Palantir and why it's garnering so much interest from investors.
So two things. One is AI. This is a company that has sort of made its embrace of AI sort of central to how it talks about what it does. This is a company that makes software that helps governments and big companies organize data. So part of it is that this general sense that big companies and the government are going for AI. And the second part is related to the other thing you mentioned, which is Elon Musk, Donald Trump, this sense that the Trump administration is likely to embrace things like Palantir. I think both because you have Doge and you have Elon Musk saying we need to make things more efficient. Palantir has a value proposition there, but also, of course, there is a political connection. You know, Palantir, co-founded by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, still a major shareholder in this company. They are going to have, you would think, at least some kind of inside lane in terms of trying to get additional contracts, both because of the relationships with the Thiel network, because of their AI stuff, and because of Thiel himself.
Okay, speaking of government contractors, Palantir is a government contractor. So too is SpaceX. SpaceX founder, Tesla, the guy who built Tesla, we can fair to say, Elon Musk, they have or had relationships with President Trump. So that's where we want to go, and we want to bring in Kurt Wagner. What do we know about all that Elon and his team of engineers and others linked to his own company? And the Doge team, what exactly they're doing, at what parts of the U.S. government, what they're asking, and what they're trying to accomplish?
Generally, what you can assume is that Elon and his team are taking a bit of a forceful approach, right? I mean, we saw stories come out about them, essentially bullying their way into having full access to the Treasury Department's payment system. We saw them, single-handedly close USAID, right? Like this idea that they could go in and just sort of say, hey, this agency, this federal agency we don't think they're doing a good job, and we're just going to, shut them down right then and there. And we hear these sort of horror stories come out from employees of these, different agencies who are saying, hey, we're trying to maybe stop this group of people. We're trying to make sure that they have appropriate access levels to read this classified information. And essentially, they're just forcing their way through. And so what I wrote about was just sort of the parallels between what we're seeing there and what we saw with the Twitter takeover, right? Which was obviously a very brute force effort as well. Elon shows up, he brings his crew of people who are loyal to him and sort of just fan out and start causing chaos and wreaking havoc. And I think we're seeing that now, but on a government scale, which is obviously a very different and I think a bit of a scarier situation for people.
Max, I want to bring you in. I mean, in terms of when you guys talk about, Elon on the podcast and just, the coverage that you have done, that on one hand, I think Elon's probably like, this is a pretty cool task. Like, oh my God, I want to fix this, right? And on the other hand, I'm like, wait a minute, he's got to be like, look at what I have access to. Like, what do you think is his goal? What is, he learning or wanting to learn in this process? Is it altruistic or is it...
Well, I think you have a swirl. It's probably both, right?
Okay.
Both a sense of altruism and a profit motivation. And I think for someone like Elon Musk, those two things are tangled up. Elon Musk, he believes, and I think this is a genuine belief, not a cynical belief put on to make money, but he believes that yes, humanity needs to get to Mars. We should spend tens of billions of dollars, as a country on a Mars mission, and that Elon Musk, having the market-leading rocket, should get a large chunk of that money. Now, of course, that raises some significant questions in terms of conflict of interest. And I'd say, in addition to being a guy who's very motivated by these kind of big picture things, he is also a guy who tends not to pause much for concerns about conflict of interest. And that's kind of what we're seeing in some of these incidents over the past couple of weeks that Kurt's talking about. This actual, almost a physical confrontation between Musk's representatives at Doge going into USAID and attempting to get access to these classified documents, and you had USAID personnel trying to stop them.
Kurt, one thing that's unique about this situation, and it's not it's certainly there are a lot of parallels, as you write about, between what happened at Tesla and what's happening right now with Doge. He does report to the president ultimately in this. And I'm wondering if that changes things at all for the Elon Musk playbook. What do you make of it?
It feels like we haven't seen him, slow down at all to this point, right? I presume perhaps behind the scenes he's saying, hey, I really want to cut this thing. And President Trump is saying, no, don't touch that. I don't really see that maybe playing out in that way, right? It feels like Trump has certainly given him a wide berth or to go out and do this thing and to do it in the way that he thinks he should. I think the point that I was trying to make earlier in the tech column was that, with Twitter, that was a private company that was purchased with private money, right? Like, if he wants to sort of run that thing aggressively, run it into the ground in certain cases and deal with the consequences, that's his choice. The issue here is that all these decisions he is making and making them at an incredibly fast speed have an impact on, every U.S. citizen, including nobody who voted for him because he wasn't voted. He wasn't elected to this role, right? And so I think the distinction there is okay, private business, private ownership versus public funds, public impact. And that's, I think, the big thing that we need to keep in mind.
That was Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin and Bloomberg News technology reporter Kurt Wagner. We should note, after our conversation with Max and Kurt, the White House said Elon Musk will determine himself if there are conflicts of interest between his own work reviewing federal spending and his overlapping empire of 6 companies.
All right, we're going to stay with tech for a moment. We shift a little bit thanks to the world of social media and how our digital footprints are providing more information about ourselves, probably more than we realize.
Columbia Business School professor Sandra Motz writes about this in her new book, Mind Masters, the data-driven science of predicting and changing human behavior. She weighed in on Meta's recent decision in January to end third-party fact-checking and what it means for user engagement and the fight against misinformation.
Frankly, I think misinformation is just such a small piece of the entire puzzle, because a lot of the information that's out there is not necessarily fake and not true, but it's just slanted, right? So it's not necessarily that it's factually inaccurate, but it has like a certain angle and a certain spin that speaks to what we want to hear. And for me, that's even a bigger problem, because it's much harder to regulate, right? It's much harder to take down from content moderators, or as Meta is trying to do now, just from a consensus among users, right? That's an even higher bar when we think about these news that are maybe not factually inaccurate, but certainly tailored to a certain opinion.
Is this the way of the future, though? Are we sort of moving past this idea of a fact-based society and one that's more based on interpreting what you see that's thrown at you? And I think it takes on a different... The question takes on something different when as I'm asking, I'm thinking about AI generated content and what we do know is real and what we don't know is not real.
Yeah, I think it's a risky gamble to think about this moving post or past what I think of shared reality, right? It's the idea that as a society, as people living together, frankly, we can make sense of the world in a way that at least offers us the opportunity to have a discussion. And I think the moment that we enter this world where I have a completely different reality than you, and we're not even discussing it because we're kept in these little echo chambers online, right, where I don't even see what you see, I think that's a really risky gamble, because it's not even out there anymore. We don't have the public square anymore where we can say, well, this is something that you've seen, I've seen this, well, what do you think is actually true, how should we be moving forward? And I think that is what is missing.
Well, it's so funny. I think we thought social media was going to be great, sparking all these conversations, but it's really kind of a one pathway dump, if you will, right? And then you kind of have to deal with it. What I want to ask you is, your book, Mind Masters, The Data-Driven Science of Predicting and Changing Human Behavior. I want to get into the predictability. Yeah. Do you say that if we had really monitored social media, we would have been able to predict the January 6th uprising? Could we have predicted some other things, in terms of what has happened in society?
Yeah. So what I'm mostly interested in is actually trying to understand individuals. So what you're talking about is like predicting these macro level trends, right? It's like, how is the collective acting? And I do think that you might have been able to predict that, right? Because this is all coming down to sentiment. It's like people are angry, people want change. So the fact that people
political
at some point took matters exactly into
elections.
their own hands,
yeah.
It's like what we call social listening. It's trying to see what is it that people care about.
And you talk specifically about something called psychological targeting, which I don't know that, Tim, have we kind of really, I don't know that I've heard that terminology. What is that?
Yeah, so psychological targeting is the way in which algorithms can translate your data into psychological constructs. So it's really trying to make sense of you as a person, right? If I told you, well, I can get access to everything you post on social media, to maybe your credit card spending, your Google searches, the sensors that are embedded in your smartphone, which keep track your location via the GPS sensor, for example. It doesn't seem that intimate, but once I can tell you, well, I can translate these traces into an understanding of whether you might be extroverted, impulsive, neurotic, whether you vote for a certain candidate, your political orientation, your sexual identity. Those are all really intimate insights. And that is the crux of psychological targeting. It's making use of AI and machine learning to translate data into human understandable profiles.
Do you have to use AI and data? Because your book opens up talking about your own personal experience. Yeah. The first 18 years of your life spent in a very small village of 500 people, and an accident that you had that then immediately everybody knew about. What's the connection between that and where technology is today and what tech can do?
Yeah, so I think it's absolutely right in that the fact that we oftentimes observe people's behavior and make inferences about who they are isn't new, right? In this village that I grew up in, people observed what I was doing. They saw me running to the bus every morning, and they probably figured out that I wasn't the most organized person in the world. And so the incident that you were referring to is essentially I had this motorcycle crash, and the whole village knew about it, right? So in an instance, those news spread, and it's not just like an isolated, well, this is what happened. It's like, okay, I'm going to now understand who Sandra is, and I'm going to use that knowledge moving forward to maybe push her in certain directions, right? Maybe if she's not organized, maybe she's not the one that I want to rely on when I have to move my stuff or when I have to organize something that has to be perfectly done. So I think that the shift to the digital world just means that we have neighbors all around us, and they're not really physical neighbors. They're neighbors that are algorithms, and they observe everything we do based on the data and then make very similar inferences.
That was Columbia Business School professor Sandra Motz on her new book, Mind Masters, The full conversation can be found on our podcast feed.
Still ahead on Bloomberg Businessweek, President Trump's plans for Gaza and Ukraine. Maybe.
This is Bloomberg.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
A lot coming our way from the White House when it comes to geopolitics and I guess foreign policy, perhaps. There was President Trump's idea of depopulating and taking over Gaza, which he mentioned following a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, and then was toned down by President Trump's aides.
The president's idea was broadly welcomed in Israel, with officials praising the surprise proposal as a means to beef up security following the war with Hamas. In the Arab world, though, the suggestion was taken differently. Saudi Arabia called the plan, quote, an infringement on the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. It's a position echoed by governments across the Middle East.
For some insight on the region and the difficult relationships there, we talked with Bloomberg Opinion international affairs columnist Mark Champion and Dana Stroll, senior fellow and research director at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. It's a think tank. Dana is also a recent former deputy assistant secretary of defense for the Middle East, the Pentagon's top civilian official with responsibility for the region.
What worries me slightly is that here you are at a juncture. You're in a peace process that's in several stages. The second one is going to come up faster than we than think, and it will require the kind of further forward-looking strategy and planning in order to get that through. That has not been there until now because Israel has not been willing, and certainly Hamas has not been willing to engage. So what worries me is that the administration will be thinking of and talking in these terms,
right,
which really aren't going to go anywhere. And in the meantime, we have an unsolved problem that will simply return to fighting.
Dana, come on in here. I'm wondering if given your experience in the region, your experience when it comes to diplomatic affairs, if you see this as having any weight to it, or maybe perhaps an off-the-cuff remark, or something that doesn't necessarily or should not necessarily be taken seriously. How are you looking into it?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's an off-the-cuff remark. I think it's quite consistent with the negotiating strategy we've seen from President Trump in just his first weeks in office here, which is to create a crisis, mostly with words and threats, animate his team to then have back-channel negotiations, which de-escalate a situation. And then largely, if you look at Colombia or Mexico or Canada, each government has come with modest or moderate reactions that appear to address Trump's concerns, and then all of a sudden there's a delay in what he has promised in terms of a harsh response. In this case, Netanyahu was about to face a fork in the road. Mm-hmm. If the Gaza ceasefire moves to phase 2, Israel would have had to end this war. And we've seen with all of these hostage releases, Hamas come out in their uniforms. It certainly doesn't look like the total victory that Prime Minister Netanyahu promised the Israeli people. Now, rather than talk about what Israel is going to do or the Palestinians or the region, all the talk is about what the United States is going to do. It's totally shifted the dynamics and the focus of this conversation. And I think Trump knows exactly what he's doing here.
Well, and that's a really good point. And, Mark, come on back in, because I think some of what we've been hearing is that, this is about President Trump taking the focus of what really matters. What is the next phases of the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, and really figuring that out. Do you agree that it's kind of like the flashy thing, look over here, but it kind of gets everybody off the hook of thinking about what's the next phase of this ceasefire?
I think it is. I do think that's part of what he's doing. It's simply that I don't believe he has a thought through strategy that he's trying to, unlike with the trade, where, he had things that he could get. I simply don't think that he has a strategy that will be able, to get a movement forward, to get the Israelis on board, to get to a place where you can have a serious proposal. And therefore, this kind of real estate talk and so on, I think it is serious in the sense that it's a real distraction. I take it that he knows what he's doing when he's throwing up all these, balls of fire in the air, so everybody's looking a different way. But you need to have something underneath there that you can realistically get people to do. And that, I think, is missing.
Dana, one of the things I think we keep thinking about as we watch, what's been going on in terms of threats of tariffs, then maybe a little bit of a rollback and, or things change or they're postponed in terms of their enactment. Having said that, we thought about with tariffs, what's the goal here, in your view, of President Trump in terms of meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu and what his real aim is? President Trump's aim is for Israel and for the Palestinians.
Well, first of all, what Trump wants is Israel's security, and he doesn't want to see Hamas return to a position of governance. And right now, the Arab leaders of the rest of the Middle East aren't really cooperating. They're unwilling to commit any sort of security presence or boots on the ground, meaningful resources beyond humanitarian aid, pressure on the Palestinian Authority in terms of what its leadership could look like in Gaza reconstruction, or an actual day after plan for Gaza. All he's heard from Arab leaders is mostly no, what they're unwilling to bring to the table. And now you see the dynamics sort of shifting. And of course, next week, the table is set for King Abdullah of Jordan, followed by perhaps Egyptian President Sisi, all coming to Washington. And this is going to be the focus. So you see a lot of movement because of what Trump has said.
Mark, does it threaten relationships that the U.S. has in the region, such as President Trump's relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for example?
Well, not at this point. I do think that there's a huge difference in the situation between his first term and his second term. In his first term, the interests of the Gulf states and Israel were more or less aligned. Their biggest concern was Iran, the threat from Iran, so he was able then to get the Abrams Accords, and after that, the Biden administration was able to talk to the Saudis about similar deals, because there was no real impediment. And this time around, since October 23, when you've got you've had the war in Gaza in between, and also the sort of interests of Saudi Arabia in particular have changed, much more focused on the economy and stability, less worried about Iran. You now have a different situation, and I just think it's going to be quite difficult to bring these different interests together, where you've got the domestic political concerns of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states now focused on their own populations and their view of Gaza, and it just makes it harder to bring everybody together. And I'm not clear that he's got a plan for that.
Dana, when we think about what is the plan though for Palestinians, Mark's column gets into Gaza is a demolition site. It's a mess. And to think about the Palestinians going back there, I mean, how do they live? There's no infrastructure. So there needs to be some kind of rebuild. And you do wonder how this happens going forward. How do you see it playing out in terms of,
First of all, the estimates for the cost of rebuilding Gaza are upwards of $80 billion, and we're probably talking about decades to clear out the rubble and rebuild Gaza. So there's not really a temporary relocation of Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And based on past U.S. experiences, for example, post-conflict reconstruction in Iraq and then Afghanistan, the difference in Gaza is how concentrated the destruction is and the closed nature of the borders. So civilians can't move around when we're trying to get ordnance, unexploded mines and bombs, and the rubble cleared out. So this was always going to be a huge challenge. Just on the remarks about the region, what's totally different from Trump's first term is the strategic nature of the Middle East. Iran is more vulnerable today than it ever has been because of Israel's military strikes that have taken out its air defenses. Bashar al-Assad is gone in Syria. There's also a ceasefire in Lebanon and an opportunity to reimagine Lebanon without a stranglehold of Hezbollah governance, and the same thing in Hamas in Gaza. Trump can't do this alone. He needs the Europeans, he needs the Arab leaders. And I think there's an opportunity here for different leaders to bring things to the table. It's not only about Gaza.
Well, Dana, sticking on Gaza, it does raise the question of what the future of Gaza is. What is the plan for Gaza if the United States does not go through with the plan that President Trump said at the White House?
On the current trajectory, without anything other than what we see right now, Gaza is probably going to become something like Mogadishu on the Mediterranean. There's no non-Hamas alternative to governing Gaza. We've seen that there's plenty of Hamas guys who have come out of the tunnels, put their uniforms back on, are distributing humanitarian aid and telling people we're going to help you get back to your homes and we're going to help you rebuild. So that means that Hamas reconstitutes. It regains governance over Gaza, and its remaining leaders have already threatened to do October 7th over and over and over.
Hey, Mark, before we wrap up with you, we did want to ask you about Russia and Ukraine, the role the U.S. and President Trump will play in what happens next. We know U.S. allies expect the Trump administration to present a long-awaited plan to end Russia's war in Ukraine at the Munich Security Conference in Germany next week. This is according to folks in the know. You've got a second column out about President Trump saying he wants some of Ukraine's resources in return for continuing aid. You note that this is a price worth paying. Why?
Well, first of all, it's something that President Zelensky of Ukraine offered. So he put out this victory plan last year, and one of the 5 baskets in there was incentives for the West. But it's quite clear that he had a transactional Donald Trump in mind. Incentives to say, look, you're not just helping us, you're helping yourselves. After the war, we have a lot of resources, and we're willing to open them up and make them available to you. So there's lithium, there's magnesium, there's a number of different resources that would be useful in industry and the EV industry and so on. So he was just, it's already there, offered. Trump has taken up the offer. It's exactly what Zelensky was trying to do. And given Europe's weakness militarily, its failure to really build military capabilities, once it became clear that the peace dividend of the Cold War was over, it really isn't able to do it on its own. Mm-hmm. So Ukraine needs the U.S. and Europe. You could describe this as the price that Europe should be willing to pay, allowing the U.S. under Trump to have access to some of these materials. Just keep quiet about it because they need the American military. They need Trump.
That was Bloomberg Opinion's Mark Champion and Dana Stroll, Senior Fellow and Research Director at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
And that wraps up our first hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Businessweek from Bloomberg Radio. Ahead in our next hour, why almost everything we are told about business is wrong.
Plus, the founder and CEO of Farm Girl Flowers, Christina Stembel, on getting ready for the big day next week and navigating everything from tariffs to turmoil.
And Trivago CEO on travel demand in 2025.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Plenty ahead in our second hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Businessweek, including the corporation in the 21st century, why almost everything we are told about business is wrong.
Plus, Trivago's CEO on whether or not we are all still traveling, and the founder and CEO of Farm Girl Flowers on Valentine's Day and AI.
First up this hour, the so-called Magnificent Seven. We talk about them each and every day. Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta Platforms, and Tesla. As a group, they were up nearly 70% last year and 107% in 2023.
Yet our next guest writes in his new book that, quote, the dominance of the seven is likely to be as transitory as that of the large businesses of earlier generations. And he offers U.S. Steel, General Motors, and IBM as examples of companies whose shares investors once clamored to buy.
Sir John Kay is a writer, professor, economist, economic consultant, a fellow at St. John's College, Oxford, and more. He has spent years studying the interplay between business, economics, and finance. And his new book is The Corporation in the 21st Century, Why Almost Everything We Are Told About Business is Wrong. Sir John joined us from London.
There are two kinds of business books and bookshops. right? One are the ones that are 5 tips as to how to run my business better on Monday. And the others are how awful capitalism is and how terrible these tech titans are and how they ought to be cut down to size, if not put in jail. And I want to write for intelligent people who take a view somewhere in between the two, or I just want to know about business the way people want to know about history or science.
Well, when you look at
how it works.
Sir John, when you look at businesses today, it does feel like increasingly, even though a few years ago it was all about multiple stakeholders, employees, customer, companies, so on and so forth, it does feel like it is not necessarily the case. And increasingly, it's about profitability and the C-suite. Many would say this. Is that fair? And I mean, is that accurate?
I think it would be right.
Yeah.
Well, it would be partly right. And the truth is that business is about creating great businesses. And we have a striking example of that at the moment. We have many. But one that is absolutely on your lips at the moment is Boeing. And in the second half of the 20th century, people at Boeing built a great business, the world's dominant aviation producer. And they were clear that that was what they were doing. Bill Hallen, who was CEO of Boeing for some time, said, we're here to live, eat, and breathe the world of aeronautics. That was what his Boeing was about. And it built planes that came to dominate the world. Then in the turn of the 20th century, there was a takeover, or a merger rather, which was effectively a cultural, although not a financial, takeover by McDonnell Douglas of Boeing. And Harvey Stonecipher, who was who became CEO of Boeing, he had been a McDonnell Douglas executive. He became CEO of Boeing. And he said, people say this is a great engineering company. It is. But people invest in a company because they want to make money. And we know the things that followed from that. The 737 MAX, which ended in disaster. And now we have this farce of astronauts stranded in the International Space Station, waiting for Elon Musk, ironically, to come and rescue them.
Sir John,
set up to build great business, they did. Then they emphasized shareholder value. And they destroyed, in the end, not only the business, but the shareholder value.
Well, it sounds like that's a case of incentives not necessarily being aligned here. And I know as an economist, you study incentives. Are the incentives of the structure that we have that exists today, are they misaligned? Because companies are rewarded for what they're able to do on the top line and what they're able to do on the bottom line. That's what they're rewarded for. Is that the wrong thing for them to be rewarded for?
They're not really rewarded on what they do on the top line. They're rewarded on a basis of some 3-year metrics and what happens to the stock price. They're not rewarded for creating shareholder value in the long run, which is what these 20th century Boeing executives actually did. The way you create shareholder value actually is you build a great business. And if you build a great business, shareholder value follows from that. It's that way round. I was interested that one of the reviewers of my book was someone who had been an English Test international cricketer. And he drew my attention to the book by football coach Bill Walsh that says the score takes care of itself. And that's the message. If you build a great business, shareholder value follows from that. Maybe the guys who took over Boeing in the 21st century created shareholder value. They certainly paid quite a lot back to shareholders in the 2010s, but they did a damage irrevocably, I suspect, the reputation of the business.
Sir John, as part of the problem, my husband and I talk about this all the time, is that we don't make a lot of stuff anymore. We're such a service-led economy, and I don't know if that has changed the dynamics within companies and leaders and so on and so forth. Is that part of the problem?
It certainly has happened. but I don't think it's part of the problem. Indeed, it's almost the opposite of the problem, because it used to be that businesses were created by capitalists, by rich men who spent some of their fortunes on building steel mills and textile plants and so on, and employed typically rather unskilled workers to work in them. The great businesses now are groups of highly qualified, technically proficient people. And the business of running the business is to put together the right combinations of people. So we've had that change which has happened, so that the means of production are now the people, not the plant.
So what is the purpose of a company?
The purpose of a company is to satisfy a whole range of stakeholders. The reason we allow companies to exist is that they do a lot of things we want done, to produce great products, to give people satisfying jobs, to make money for shareholders. It isn't any one of these things. And if you try to emphasize any one of these things, you do so at the expense of the totality. And the people who built great businesses, whether we're talking about Sloan at General Motors, whether we're talking about Alan and others at Boeing, or whether we're talking about the people who built the Magnificent Seven, the tech companies we all talk about now, they didn't set out, I want to make as much money as possible. They certainly didn't set out to say, I want to make a lot of money for shareholders. They said, I want to build a great business. And they did. In the course of doing that, they made a lot of money for shareholders. And that's the way around it is. The score takes care of itself.
So let's go back to the Magnificent Seven and to the way that we open this, because you do argue in the introduction of the book that the Mag 7, even though people are clamoring to buy the shares of those companies, they're going to be just as transient as some of those large businesses of earlier generations. Why is that?
Well, they may even be more transient, because their strength lies in their people rather than their plant. Whereas at Carnegie or Ford or General Motors, it was the plant that determined the business. These dominances are almost always transient. 30 years ago, when people understood that information technology was going to be a big thing, it was IBM whose shares they bought. They made that the most valuable company in the world. Now, Facebook and Meta are top of many people's lists. I know that Facebook, my grandchildren now think that's something for people of my age. It's not something but maybe
not Instagram
using.
and WhatsApp, and that's what has been their saving grace.
Right. Well, and there's an issue there that we need to talk about, which is the nature of antitrust policy. And we allowed, mistakenly in my view, companies like Meta to take over Instagram and WhatsApp, whereas the whole strength of the market economy comes from people devising new things to take the place of the things that went before. Actually, Facebook took over from MySpace, which was the predecessor of Facebook in providing the kind of services that Facebook does. People have forgotten about MySpace now. Interestingly, MySpace, when I talked to executives there as to why things had gone wrong, they said because it was bought by News Corp and Rupert Murdoch, who were mainly interested in creating shareholder value.
Your title is Why Almost Everything We Are Told About Business is Wrong. So if that's the case, if we are getting it wrong, what's the outcome of that? And if we don't get it right, if we don't maybe perhaps change the academic research about how we think about companies, if we don't do that, what's the outcome?
I think the outcome is that we get things wrong in a pretty fundamental way. And in the first half of the 20th century, people saw themselves as trying to create a profession of management, which was a respected profession, like law or medicine or the priesthood or whatever. when people were called to do that and derived a lot of the satisfaction of their job, not just from from what they were paid, but from the feeling that they were contributing something worthwhile to society. We've lost a lot of that, and I think it's made business a good deal worse as a result. And we can see the kind of loss of legitimacy that has followed. The murder of Brian Thompson 3 or 4 weeks ago is a pretty good example of that. The fact that almost 40% of respondents to a poll suggested that murder was at least partly justified. It seems to me a terrible commentary on the way business is now regarded among a large section of the population, particularly the young population.
That was Sir John Kay, a fellow at St. John's College, Oxford, and the author of The Corporation in the 21st Century: Why Almost Everything We Are Told About Business is Wrong.
Still ahead on Bloomberg Businessweek, it's the most wonderful and one of the busiest times of the year for the founder and CEO of Farm Girl Flowers.
We talk Valentine's Day, tariffs, and the stickiness of the flower supply chain. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Not sure, Tim, if you're aware, but Valentine's Day is here. Does your wife give you hints, or like, is it a big deal?
We're not big with that stuff. It's actually kind of great.
Yeah,
to be honest,
we aren't too either. We knew though, because Christina Stembel often joins us during big months for the flower industry. So think Mother's Day, and yes, of course, Valentine's Day, which is this coming Friday. However, a little box from my husband is always welcome.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think I even got one year I got a toaster, which sounds so boring. But it was this really cool old-fashioned toaster because I was making like waffles every morning, and I still have it, and I love it. I think it's like a dual lit or something.
Also, like you look at it every day, you remember. You know?
It's like so sweet. It's so sweet. I love it.
Well, Christina is founder and CEO of Farm Girl Flowers. It's a company that she bootstrapped into a $35 million business. She was in from Seattle, and she stopped by our studio.
Business is good. I mean, we're in our second busiest time of year. We're holding steady with exactly where we thought we'd be.
Where do the flowers come from, and how do you think about tariffs?
Yeah, so most of the flowers that everyone purchases in the United States come from South America. So Colombia was the first one that put everybody on edge in the floral industry. It would have been too late to really impact Valentine's Day numbers, but by Mother's Day, our prices would increase dramatically with Colombia. So that's on pause right now as well, which is really wonderful. Canada and Mexico, differently. So Mexico is going to impact us all as well. About 80% of all the flowers that are sold in the United States come from other countries. Ours is less. We're about 55 to 60% domestic right now. But that's going to increase. Our domestic production is going to be increased because everyone's going to be fighting for it because they're not going to be able to get the same prices elsewhere.
You think, how much, in anticipation of this impacting, how much does it, when do people start to change in terms of growing more here in the United States? How much more can you grow in the United States? Because you're competing for land against everything else. So I'm just curious, how quickly can the model change from importing to having it grown domestically?
I don't even know if it's possible to change it. I mean, following, the CEO of Ford, I feel very similarly to him. We don't have the infrastructure here. There's not a lot of succession planning in farming in general, in agriculture of any kind. Flowers are the same way. So, the land has been sold. The grandfathers that started farms, their grandchildren have already sold a lot of the farmland. Almost everything that was, I shouldn't say everything, but a large percentage of what was grown in California, which is the largest growing state in the United States, is now in Baja, Mexico. So they call it Baja California. We know that's not true. So the tariffs are going to, definitely impact that. And there's not the land, also the labor. I mean, there's not, for agriculture jobs, there's not the labor availability. The infrastructure costs too much. The insurance, people aren't going to spend $300 on a bouquet. And, in order to turn around the ship, it's going to require American consumers to be willing to spend a lot more on sending a gift. And that isn't probably going to happen. So it's scary to think about all those things.
So if we were to see tariffs go into effect on Mexico, and, obviously the president has used this as a way to negotiate, at least he did that with Colombia a few weeks ago. Where would the prices increase? You said it would increase for you. you would have to pass those along to the consumer.
Absolutely.
You would not be able to absorb those.
The floral industry is notoriously low margin. Yeah. I'm very proud of the single-digit profit margins that we have at Farm Girl Flowers. They are hard fought for that. We work a lot of hours. We work really hard for that, single digits. The largest companies in our industry that are, public companies, so you can go look at their earnings, have single-digit profits when they have profits. So there's no way for us not to pass it on to consumers. We're already subsidizing shipping by a large percentage. Now if we have to subsidize our gross margins are tiny compared to almost every other industry. I joke a lot. I have with you guys before. I wish we sold sweaters, right? We don't. So,
or perfume.
Yeah, exactly. Perfume. Something with like very large, mascara.
Have you considered developing NVIDIA chips?
Exactly. Well, so it's all going to have to be passed on. We are. Because we have that little bit of profit that we've focused on in the last 2 years, we're able to supplement it a small amount, like the CEO Ford said, like he has a couple weeks, like we can supplement it a bit, but not,
It's also not like you guys can buy ahead and stockpile it in warehouses, right? There, flowers just last just a certain amount of time.
5 days. We have 5 days.
You have five days,
yes.
It's wild. I do wonder about this whole idea of globalization that has happened over the last couple of decades, right, in global supply chains. And then we feel like we've talked a lot about nearshoring and onshoring. It sounds like for the flower industry, it's not even like financially, it won't work, even if we do it. Or it might not even be doable because there might not be the land or farming to do it.
Absolutely. When we first started talking, we had a large, it was pre-COVID, we had a large manufacturing facility in San Francisco. So 40,000 square feet, we had 300 team members there, and we were losing our shirts. I'll just say it. We were just breaking even enough to pay paychecks with that. We can't even do it not growing the flowers, just designing them into bouquets at that scale. There's not enough workers, and with Costco just raising the minimum wage to $32, which is wonderful, we wouldn't have that ability to. So we're trying to all compete with an hourly workforce that we can't. So there's just so many reasons why this is going to have a ripple effect much greater than what most consumers would think.
So what do you do for assembly now?
We have a very diversified model. So we use farm partners that we teach them how to design them and ship them out. We have bouquet production facilities. Yeah. We have very little owned ourselves. It's been smarter for us to do it that way. So
you've essentially outsourced the design or assemblage of the bouquets?
Yes, we do it different than our competitors in a way that we control the design aspect of it, and so that way we can keep our quality where we need it to be. But it's not how it used to be pre-COVID.
So when you say you've outsourced it to farmers, so if it comes from South America on a plane, it's already in a bouquet?
Yes. Now, most of ours are with U.S. farmers, but we do have some in Colombia. We have one in Ecuador. So we do have facilities elsewhere. Some of them are designed there. Some of them are shipped raw materials to other facilities in the U.S. We diversified to get closer to the end consumer to help with our shipping costs that were killing us before when we first started talking as well. Yeah. In order to be able to compete with lower price points that we need to have to compete with our competitive set.
Is it getting easier or harder to do this? How long have you been doing this now?
14. This is our 15th year.
I thought it was 15. Yeah. So, and it's you who has been doing it. So I'm just curious, as a small business owner who has seen pandemics and you name it, like some really incredible things kind of test your ability to keep it going. Like, is it an easier business environment? And I'm curious too what you're anticipating from the new administration in terms of small business policy, if at all.
Yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried about this administration and what it's going to mean for us as a company.
Why?
Because
of tariffs and things.
And the uncertainty. I've gotten used to, the easier part has been I've gotten used to more uncertainty. I understand now that should be a line item in my budget every year, which there is now for unplanned expenses. Things I didn't understand before. And I think my mindset shifting from, growth at all costs to profitability has helped us tremendously. But I had to sacrifice something for that. I wanted the Silicon Valley dream. I wanted to build a company. I wanted to be the, cover of Entrepreneur magazine. I wanted all those things. And that now I have a very different reality. And I'm happy with that reality. I'm happy that I can provide good jobs that are more stable. But the level of uncertainty with things I can't control right now, definitely keeps me up at night.
So is it easier in general?
I think because it's easier because of the education that I've received from doing it. Yeah. If it's harder, it's definitely more complex, but because I'm wiser now, it's a bit easier, I guess.
Yeah.
You bootstrap the company, so you don't have the same pressure that a lot of startups, and I'm not even considering you a startup because you've been around for 15 years at this point, that small businesses have after they raise outside funding, and that's for an exit. Last time we spoke with you, you said you were in this for the long haul. I'm sure there are companies that come by who want to acquire you. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually used to think this was my biggest curse. I actually owned the unfundable ChristinaStumble.com, by the way, and the unfundable. I used to think I would complain about it, to you both. I would complain constantly and be like, nobody will give me any money. Like, do I not look trustworthy? Look at our numbers. And now I think it's the greatest gift because I see all of my friends that have, startups or not startups anymore, but have, board meetings every 3 months that they are just in so much pain about, and everybody is expecting them to work miracles in an economy that's not, it's not possible, Right. And, right now, I'm just, really happy that it happened. I think it's a big gift I was given. And how I'm looking at it for the long run now is, doing some smart strategic things that I think will help us in 5 to 10 years, not thinking about the next quarter, not thinking even this year, like, it's a building year for us. We'll comp last year and have the same, single digits profit, hopefully. But that single digit profit is allowing us to do things like lock down some supply chain. We're vertically integrating. We're growing some flowers for the first time. We're doing things like that that I think will help us 5 to 10 years from now.
Where do you think you will be in 5 to 10 years?
Hopefully still here talking to you both.
We hope so too.
That's my dream. And, hopefully, we'll do sustainable growth. So we'll be bigger 5 to 10 years from now, but we'll have done it the right way, in a way that we could be here 50 years if we wanted to.
Yeah. When you say sustainable growth, you're talking about financial sustainable growth. But I also am curious about the impact on the environment and how your approach and stuff like that can be challenging.
Absolutely can be challenging. It's always weighing what's the best thing we can do in our opinion, right? Like, we're very careful not to call ourselves like an eco, we get this title a lot and we're always like, no, don't, like, there's nothing sustainable about flowers. Really, there's lots of transportation back and forth, inbound, outbound. They're, they bring joy to people's lives and we love that, but we do the best we can. We always make the right decision, even if it impacts the bottom line in a negative way for us. We spend more money to do it the right way, but we don't ever tout our environmental consciousness.
How has what people want changed? Like, how has what you offer changed due to changing consumer taste? I was talking to somebody who's way younger than I am, and she just got engaged. She has a huge diamond, and it's a lab-grown diamond. And she was saying, all my friends who are getting engaged right now are getting these lab-grown diamonds, and we're seeing that kill the diamond industry and kill some of these retailers out there. Is that happening with flowers? Like, are there changing consumer tastes for younger people?
I don't think it's taste, really. It is price points, though.
Yeah.
What consumers will spend. I mean, Valentine's Day is the only exception to this rule. People are looking for deals right now. People are looking for a good value. So that does... I'm still head of product. I make every bouquet you see on our site.
Wow.
And when we're doing it, we are, always weighing, like, we need to keep our AOV, our average order value, up, as high as possible, but we need to not, right now we have kind of a gap in the good customer. We have better and best, but we're working on creating a better, offering for the good customer that is more price sensitive, especially going into next year. I think it's going to be even more and more necessary. And also people are looking to feel like they got a deal. So discount codes, we used to be like we're like, we give you the best deal we can. And now we're like, okay, here's a discount code, here's a free ship shop. So it looks like you're getting free shipping, but shipping costs a lot of money. So it's not free shipping.
There's no such thing as free shipping.
Nothing. There's no such thing as free shipping. So
I feel like Shark Tank, what's your customer acquisition cost? Like, is it expensive, or do you find like most of your customer base, they're repeat, buyers and so on and so forth? Like, give us an idea.
Yeah, so about half are repeat and half are not. We do not exceed $25 in customer acquisition cost. Because we can't.
Right.
So that's why we're smaller than we want to be right now. But we're doing that because if we go over that, we know that we are paying more money than we can afford to be financially healthy. So we just cut it off there.
That's Christina Stenovec, founder and CEO of Farm Girl Flowers. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Coming up, more of our conversation with Christina, looking at how AI is lending a helping hand.
Yeah, she's using it. We're trying to still figure out how to use it, but she's on it. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
We're back with Christina Stenovec, founder and CEO of Farm Girl Flowers, who created her business 15 years ago from the ground up. She did it all, putting in long hours, dealing with supply chain crunches and a global pandemic, and today is getting an assist from AI.
We're picking everybody's brains because we're not using it as probably, and everybody's like, you should be. And we're like, all right, so how are you doing it?
I mean, I use it a lot personally for writing.
Do you?
Yeah, absolutely. I have it. It knows my tone now. Like every job description, I have it writing for me now, and the tone that everything is. So I use it a lot personally for that. In emails as well. I'm always like, take out the emotion in this email or things like that. So I use it a lot for that personally. And it helps from business, because I can get my soapbox out and stuff I need to not sometimes. So I use it for that. We use it a little bit in customer service. There's even like with the platform we use, there's a make it nicer button that, that uses AI to make our, after customer service, if they're getting hit with a snowstorm,
So you have a button, you get it, like when you're sending an email to a customer, you have a button you press that says make it nicer?
Make it nicer.
Wow.
Thank you, Gladly.
Is it in an LLM?
It's Gladly, which is a software program for customer service, which we love. And all of our team was in customer service last Mother's Day when we had a big snowstorm, or Valentine's Day, and we had a big delay because of that. And we were all like, at the end of the day, make it nicer, because it gets hard. Yeah.
So what's hard about running a small business right now?
Yeah, I think
if you need funding, can you get it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you can only get it when you don't need it. I mean,
That's a good point. That's a good point. Well, do you so how do you manage, I don't know, what's the economic backdrop that you think about for the United States right now? As you said, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot coming at us. I mean, I'm just curious, how are you managing for, what kind of a consumer that's going to constantly look for a value? Give us an idea.
I think marketing is actually the hardest thing by far. Getting traffic to your site in an affordable way, cutting through all the noise. I mean, you see your inbox. People are sending emails. Some companies are getting 3 a day from.
It's annoying.
Yeah, it is, right? I'm one of those people that's once a day. I'm sorry. We won't go more than that. But, it's trying to cut through that noise with, like I said, our customer acquisition costs. If we could spend $60 or $70, but why would we for $104 AOV? That doesn't make any sense. And a 1.7 to 2.2 LTV, we know how it's not worth it.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it. So I think the hardest thing is trying to figure out creative ways with limited team members, because you also have to run really lean right now. So you don't have a ton of team members to be able to do lots more partnerships or things like that will actually help you with the customer acquisition cost.
Have you had a chance while you've been in New York City to see any of the bodega flower displays?
No, I have not.
How do they do this? Because it's such a low margin business, but you can still get bouquets of flowers.
The delis, I always found the delis. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do they do that?
They're all imported. Yeah. Okay. They're imported from, and the flower types that are there are ones that will hold up for a very long time. So, if I'm going to use button chrysanthemums, those can be outside of that deli or bodega, you can buy it for $20 and it can sit there for 3 weeks. A David Austin Rose, you can't. A David Austin Rose is going to cost you $2 at wholesale, $1.50 to $2 at wholesale price, which means it's going to cost you $6 for that David Austin Rose. And you have about 3 days. So it's a type of flowers they use. It's where it's coming from. It's the colors that a lot of people don't. If we like peaches and pinks and things like that, you're going to get bright purples and bright yellows and things like that that are the kind of the leftovers people don't want. They cut deals to them.
It's not always the greatest colors. There's a lot of carnations in there.
A lot of carnations.
Noted.
Just going to say.
Noted.
No, it's interesting to hear, though, what the wholesale prices of, a great rose or something is, because you realize, when you're doing a bouquet, and you're like, oh, my God, but you realize that your cost is expensive.
Really expensive. I mean, King Proteas are my favorite flowers, and we get them for about $7.
Which one?
King Proteas. You've seen them. They're awesome. They're from Australia, New Zealand area, South Africa. We have a lot of buying power, but if you were smaller, it'd be $12 to $15 per stem. So I mean, if you're going to a local flower shop, it's going to cost you $45 a stem for it.
Our thanks to Farm Girl Flowers founder and CEO, Christina Stembel.
So flowers work for Valentine's Day. So too does a surprise trip to say, hey, honey, I bought tickets to the Caribbean or to Europe.
Just to clarify, my wife would be very into that.
On it. All right. This past week, the global hotel and accommodation search platform Trivago reported fourth quarter revenue that beat the average analyst estimate. The stock, however, traded down on the results, but it has soared this year.
Trivago CEO Johannes Thomas joined us from Dusseldorf, Germany, to talk about the business and the outlook.
I think base customer is the travel world. It's a 1.5 trillion market in size, so pretty exciting. It's also growing 5 to 10% a year, so a big and growing business. And Trivago is a leading brand across the globe in travel. And we have been working on the last 1.5 years to reestablish the brand after a near-death experience during the pandemic.
How's that refresh going right now? What can you point to show a recovery from that near-death experience as you described it?
Yeah, I was returning to the company 1.5 years ago together with the leadership team, and we all have been folks that we were at Trivago for a decade, brought it to the IPO. And then during the pandemic, we left basically. And then out of the pandemic, the company didn't come strong. And we think that is a result of low investment during the pandemic. Trivago is built as a brand, so brand investment is important. If you invest into a brand during a period where nobody's traveling, it's pretty inefficient. So there was not a good place to invest in brand. And then after the pandemic stopped in around the beginning of 2022, Trivago was pretty conservative in investing into brand. Other companies basically recovered in size, other travel companies. Trivago didn't. And that's when one of the founders gave me and others a call if we want to come back to bring back a blueprint that has proven successful. And the last 1.5 years, we worked hard on getting the company back on track. When we arrived in Q2 2023, we were shrinking 14%. Now we've stabilized and brought the business back into growth last quarter, and we see a strong double-digit growth in Q1, which we are very excited about.
So talk to us about what you are seeing in terms of travel demand specifically and how that compares with a year ago. So in other words, is travel up? You guys just reported your numbers, and you did break it down into various regions of the world. So give us some perspective, a little bit more insight into those earnings, because investors seem a little bit disappointed here. But talk to us about what you are seeing and how that plays into your business, whether it's more upbeat than a year ago, or if you're seeing, consumers, travelers being a little bit more cautious.
Yeah. So I think last year was the year where we exceeded 2019 levels quite substantially already. So travel is hot. People want to travel. It's exciting. They want to spend and experience the world. It's the number one discretionary expense people have. Yeah. And that is what continues to be true. We see travel strong across all segments, being at the US, being at Europe. Rest of the world, Asia, pretty strong travel demand. We see prices slightly up, but I think at fairly consistent levels. So travel is strong, and we expect it to be a strong year, maybe an even stronger year than last year.
Hey, Johannes, curious about sentiment just across Europe right now and what you're seeing as a European CEO, or CEO, I should say, in Europe. We've spoken quite a bit to folks in the last couple of weeks who've returned from Davos. And two of them have told us that there is just a feeling of, optimism when it comes to American CEOs and CEOs of American companies, but a feeling of pessimism when it comes to the way that CEOs of European companies feel. Certainly there's some generalizations in there, but I'm curious about your view.
Yeah, I'm skeptical about the level of bureaucracy and the pace of execution of German companies as well, and European companies as well. There's just a lot of regulations and things that make companies slow here. I think we try to be very different, having a growth mindset, a fanatic learning mindset as a company. We are in the digital space. We are operating at global scale. We do TV marketing campaigns in more than 20 markets. We operate in more than 40 markets. So it's not for us a European or German game. But overall, I think Europe has to amp up and has to put a mindset in place where hard and smart work is needed to be successful. And I think there needs to be a mindset shift in Europe. Otherwise, it will be a decade that is difficult for the region.
But are you seeing? So you're not seeing that weakness across your platforms, or you are seeing it?
We are not seeing it in our developed European segment. The travel is weak. I mean, people have money. It's not that there's no money in this region. It's more a question of, can you keep growing, or will you be outgrown from other regions over time? They have still good budget to invest into travel, but what destinations will you go to in the future? Hotels are 30% up compared to pre-pandemic, and people are feeling that. And the number one struggle for travelers is security and safety. Number one, geopolitical issues. People stay closer to home. And number two is price. They increased expensive, and that's also true across the world. Price pressure, because travel became so expensive, is a big challenge for travelers.
So, Johannes,
and for Europeans, it will be even more. Yeah.
Yeah. Apologies. What would you say is the way for European regulators to sort of decrease bureaucracy, to encourage innovation, to create real competition, so there isn't this lost decade?
I'm not an expert in this topic. I just think less rules, more freedom to people, so they can actually take decisions themselves. If I have somebody else taking decisions for me all the time, I stop taking decisions myself, and I think that's where a lot of collective intelligence is being lost. So I think that would be a good start, just to for every rule or legislation you put in place, you kill 5, and then you maybe get to a way where it's less wild of regulation. Yeah.
Johannes, before you go, just got about 35 seconds here. Geopolitics, trade wars, tariffs, all of this plays out in global financial markets, plays out in the FX market, which can certainly impact whether or not a consumer feels like their currency will go farther along. How is all of this impacting travel demand, if at all? And again, only got about 30 seconds.
So I think travel hugely correlates with GDP. So it depends where the economy is going, whether travel will be well off or not. And it's rather reacting quickly on it. People delay demand, delay investments. Otherwise, we see that people already book early in advance to make sure they get a good deal. They compare prices, and that's where our product fits pretty well into the proposition that users are looking for.
Our thanks to Trivago CEO Johannes Thomas.
And that wraps up the weekend edition of Bloomberg Businessweek from Bloomberg Radio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Be sure to tune in to Bloomberg Businessweek Monday through Friday, starting at 2 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, and on Sirius XM, channel 121. You can also listen to us on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto free in the Apple App Store or on Google Play.
You can also watch our daily broadcast on YouTube. Just search Bloomberg Global News. We're simulcast on Bloomberg Originals, available at Bloomberg.com/originals, and streaming platforms including Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Samsung TV Plus, and more.
Find our Bloomberg Businessweek podcast at Bloomberg.com, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And the latest edition of the magazine is available on newsstands now at Bloomberg.com and always on the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Tim Stenovec.
And I'm Carol Massar. Have a good and safe weekend, everyone.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business App. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.